They were the ghost hunters who changed television forever. Jason Hawes, Grant Wilson, and the rest of the TAPS team turned a simple idea into a global phenomenon. Ordinary plumbers by day, fearless investigators by night. For years, they stood apart from the fakes, the screamers, and the overactors because they prided themselves on one thing: debunking the myths and exposing the truth. Fans believed them, audiences trusted them, but behind the cameras, cracks began to show. Controversy swirled around a now infamous hood pull that some say destroyed their credibility. Friendships fractured, and the network's demand for drama buried what made the show special in the first place. Today, the legacy of Ghost Hunters is far from what it once was. The cast that built their careers on uncovering spirits now find themselves haunted by their own reputations. What happened to them after the lights dimmed? And why is their story so tragic now? Stay tuned, because this ghost story is darker than you remember. And don't forget to subscribe before we begin. When Ghost Hunters premiered in October 2004, it immediately felt different from anything else on television. Paranormal shows already existed, but most relied on drama, shaky cameras, and jump scares. Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson weren't actors, they weren't mystics, and they weren't trying to sell themselves as paranormal experts with supernatural powers. They were plumbers from Rhode Island, men who lived ordinary lives and ran the Atlantic Paranormal Society, TAPS, on the side. That everyman quality was exactly what made them believable. They seemed real because they were real. They worked with tools, not theatrics, and that gave the show its identity. From the very first season, the difference was clear. When most ghost shows turned unexplained noises into paranormal proof, Jason and Grant would look for drafts, faulty plumbing, or loose wiring. Where others screamed and ran, TAPS stood their ground. They approached cases like mechanics trying to solve a mystery, not actors trying to entertain. This gave them a credibility that audiences weren't used to, and it struck a chord. By the end of the first season, Ghost Hunters wasn't just a niche show. It was the gold standard of paranormal television. The success snowballed quickly. Ratings grew, merchandise launched, and the cast expanded. Investigators like Steve Gonsalves and Dave Tango became fan favorites, admired for their measured, calm approach. Spin-offs soon followed, including Ghost Hunters International and Ghost Hunters Academy. Even though not every project carried the same weight, the brand was massive. By its height, TAPS was synonymous with paranormal investigation, a household name that stretched far beyond its The Sci-Fi Channel home. For 11 seasons and more than 200 episodes, TAPS dominated. Viewers saw them as the antidote to fake ghost shows. They debunked more than they proved, and that balance gave the show integrity. In a genre flooded with sensationalism, TAPS seemed like the real deal. But success has a way of changing things. With more seasons, more specials, and more pressure from networks, the team's identity began to shift. What started as a small operation rooted in honesty and logic would eventually be tested by fame, controversy, and one scandal that would change their legacy forever. The reason fans connected with Ghost Hunters in the early years was simple. They felt authentic. Jason, Grant, and the rest of TAPS didn't just run toward every creek in the night claiming it was evidence. They investigated, and often they debunked. That willingness to explain things rationally made the scares more effective when they did happen, because viewers knew the team wasn't automatically jumping to ghosts. One memorable investigation involved claims of laughter echoing in a bathroom. At first, it was eerie, clear laughter caught in an empty space. Many shows would have played it up, milking the moment for all it was worth. But TAPS went further. They traced the sound, checked the ceiling, and discovered a hidden speaker installed above the bathroom. The case wasn't evidence of the paranormal, it was a hoax. For the homeowner, it was relief. For viewers, it was proof that this team wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even when it wasn't glamorous. Another time, bar owners reported that hanging lights shook violently on their own. Most programs would have dramatized the moment, but TAPS tore into the ceiling, finding crude mechanisms rigged to make the lights swing. Instead of claiming angry spirits were at work, they confronted the truth head-on. Watching them tell homeowners they had staged activity took guts, and fans respected it. This was the heart of TAPS, ordinary people confronting extraordinary claims with logic, patience, and a willingness to say, "This isn't paranormal." That's what set them apart from rivals like most haunted or ghost adventures. Jason and Grant didn't scream, cry, or dramatize their reaction. They calmly worked through evidence and gave homeowners peace of mind. For viewers, it was refreshing to see investigators treat hauntings with honesty rather than hype. It built trust, and for years, that trust was the reason fans kept watching. But credibility comes with risk. When a team is built on being the most honest in a dishonest genre, even one slip can destroy everything. As the seasons went on, the demands of television began to clash with the team's original mission. More drama, more scares, more entertainment. Network executives wanted spectacle. That pressure would eventually push ghost hunters away from the roots that made it strong. And when a single scandal shook that foundation, the fall was swift. By the mid-2000s, Ghost Hunters was no longer a small paranormal program. It was one of the Sci-Fi Channel's most bankable hits. With high ratings came higher expectations, and soon the investigations that once relied on patience and skepticism were being pushed toward spectacle. Fans began to notice more dramatic reveals, more cliffhangers, and fewer of the simple debunks that defined the early years. But it wasn't until the infamous hood pull incident that everything truly unraveled. During one episode, Grant Wilson was walking through a dark location when his hood suddenly jerked, as if yanked by invisible hands. On first watch, it was extraordinary. Here was a full-bodied interaction caught on camera, something no skeptic could deny. Grant stumbled back, his teammates reacted, and the cameras captured every second. For casual viewers, it was chilling, a ghost physically pulling at someone in real time. But for longtime fans who had trusted the team's credibility, something felt off. When the footage was rewatched and slowed down, the illusion started to crack. Instead of pulling outward, the hood tugged straight down, collapsing into the coat itself. Even stranger, Grant's hand never left his pocket. Observers noticed how his body seemed to lurch backward unnaturally, almost as if he had thrown himself for dramatic effect. Online, debunkers began piecing together theories. Many suggested that a retractable keychain device, the kind used by security guards, had been sewn into the lining of his coat and attached to the hood. With a subtle tug or release, it could create the illusion of a ghost pulling on him. The more fans analyzed, the more damning it looked. Frame-by-frame breakdowns appeared on YouTube, highlighting Grant's hand movements and the strange downward pull. Entire forums filled with discussions dissecting the moment. What the Sci-Fi Channel likely thought was a landmark paranormal capture, instead became the most controversial clip in the show's history. The tragedy was that this single moment undid years of credibility. TAPS had taught fans to investigate, to debunk, and to question. And when they applied those very lessons to the footage, they concluded that their heroes had staged evidence. The hood pull didn't just create doubt, it fractured the trust that had been the foundation of ghost hunters from the very beginning. If the hood pull had been a one-off, maybe the damage could have been contained. But what made the controversy worse was Jason Hawes's visible discomfort during the episode. While Grant reacted dramatically, Jason seemed skeptical, even annoyed. He inspected the hood himself, tugging at it and searching for an explanation. Yet, he found nothing. His body language, though, told a different story. Viewers later said he looked frustrated, even suspicious of his co-lead. The controversy deepened when fans noticed that a later re-upload of the episode appeared to have been edited. In the original airing, there were multiple hood pulls. Some remember 4 distinct moments. But in the versions uploaded years later, one had been cut entirely. That missing pull became its own mystery. Why would the Sci-Fi Channel remove it unless it looked too staged, too obviously fake? For fans, the edit was confirmation that even the network knew something wasn't right. Not long after the scandal gained traction, Grant Wilson announced he was leaving Ghost Hunters. The official reason was simple: to spend more time with family and pursue personal projects. But the timing raised eyebrows. To many viewers, it felt like he hadn't stepped away by choice. Instead, Instead, it seemed he was quietly pushed out to save what was left of TAPS's reputation. Jason Hawes, meanwhile, stayed on as the face of the franchise. But his silence on the hood pull spoke louder than words. Fans expected him to publicly address the incident, to protect his credibility by acknowledging what so many believed, that Grant had staged the moment. Instead, Jason stood by his friend. He defended the integrity of the show, avoided direct answers, and carried on with business as usual. For some, this loyalty was admirable. For others, it looked like complicity. The fallout was devastating. Grant, once one of the most trusted names in paranormal television, became a figure of controversy, his legacy forever tied to suspicion. Jason, who had built his career on blunt honesty, now carried the burden of being the leader who refused to admit the truth. Their friendship, once the foundation of TAPS, appeared fractured, and the brand they had built together, once untouchable, now stood in the shadow of doubt. The hood pull didn't just damage one man's reputation, it drove a wedge between two co-founders, stained a franchise, and marked the beginning of the tragic decline of Ghost Hunters. In the earliest days of Ghost Hunters, the show felt stripped down, almost raw. The investigations were quiet, patient, and authentic. Viewers sat through long stretches of silence, punctuated by the occasional unexplained sound or shadow. It was this restraint that gave TAPS their credibility. But television is an industry built on spectacle, and networks rarely leave authenticity untouched when ratings are on the line. As the show's popularity grew, so did the pressure to deliver must-see television moments. Producers began nudging the team toward bigger reactions, more suspense, and dramatic confrontations. The format shifted from calm documentation into something resembling a hybrid of paranormal research and reality TV. Arguments between cast members were emphasized, firings happened on camera, and episodes started to end with manufactured cliffhangers. Paranormal activity, once carefully examined, was now presented in a way that maximized tension, even if it meant stretching credibility. Fans who had loved the original tone noticed the change immediately. What began as a series about ordinary men investigating extraordinary claims now carried the fingerprints of network executives who wanted excitement, not skepticism. The spirit of TAPS, men who prided themselves on debunking, was slowly overshadowed by sensationalism. Instead of comfort, homeowners were given the drama of being told their houses might harbor something darker. This erosion of integrity was subtle at first, but became more obvious with time. And then came the hood pull scandal, which poured gasoline on a smoldering fire. Suddenly, all those shifts in tone looked less like natural evolution and more like evidence of manipulation. Had the show traded truth for ratings? Had the network demanded moments that were too good to be true? The tragedy was clear. The very system that elevated Ghost Hunters into a cultural phenomenon also corrupted what made it work. By leaning into theatrics, the network stripped away the foundation of honesty. What once made TAPS different from every other ghost show was now slipping away. And for many loyal fans, that betrayal was harder to stomach than any ghost story. By 2016, after 11 seasons and more than 200 episodes, the original run of Ghost Hunters came to an end. For years, the series had been a staple of paranormal television, but the controversies and shifting tone had left it weaker than it once was. Its finale didn't feel like a grand conclusion. It felt like a show that had quietly run out of steam. Yet in the world of television, no successful brand stays gone for long. In 2019, a revival was announced. Fans who had abandoned the show after the scandals wondered if this would be a chance for redemption. Perhaps the reboot would return to basics, quiet investigations, level-headed debunks, and the grounded approach that once made TAPS so respected. For a brief moment, there was hope that Ghost Hunters could repair its reputation and win back the audience it had lost. But times had changed. Paranormal television was no longer the powerhouse it had been in the mid-2000s. Shows like Ghost Adventures had taken over, leaning into a more theatrical, personality-driven style that catered to to audiences who wanted constant drama. The reboot struggled to find its place. It wasn't new enough to attract younger viewers, and it wasn't authentic enough to satisfy the die-hard fans who remembered the early years. By 2020, the reboot was cancelled, its attempt at revival barely making a ripple. The series reappeared again on Discovery Plus, but the magic was gone. Instead of a triumphant comeback, it felt like a desperate attempt to resurrect something long dead. Each new version only reminded fans how far the show had fallen from its original identity. The saddest part wasn't just the cancellations. It was the realization that Ghost Hunters would never again be what it once was. The credibility, the trust, the excitement of watching Jason and Grant walk into a haunted building with nothing but flashlights and tape recorders, it was gone. What remained was a fractured legacy, tied to a scandal that overshadowed everything else. The reboots didn't restore the franchise, they confirmed its decline. The collapse of Ghost Hunters didn't just damage the brand, it took a toll on the individuals who had built their lives around it. For Grant Wilson, the hood pull scandal would forever hang over his name. Though he officially announced he was leaving the show to spend more time with his family and pursue other projects, few could ignore the timing. The controversy had spiraled, trust in the show had collapsed, and then suddenly, one of its co-founders walked away. Grant's absence was deafening. He retreated from the spotlight, and in doing so, left behind the suspicion that his departure was less a choice and more a quiet exile. Jason Hawes, meanwhile, shouldered the burden of keeping the franchise alive. He remained the face of TAPS, hosting new iterations and defending the team's reputation. But for someone who once prided himself on blunt honesty, his refusal to directly confront the scandal became its own scar. Some fans admired his loyalty to Grant, but others saw it as a fatal mistake. Silence in the face of obvious fakery didn't look like strength. It looked like complicity. His credibility, once ironclad, now lived under a cloud of doubt. Then there were the secondary faces of the show, like Steve Gonsalves. He had always been one of the most grounded investigators, beloved for his calm demeanor and unwillingness to exaggerate. But in an interview, Steve admitted that in all his years of ghost hunting, he had never actually seen a ghostly apparition. He explained that he had encountered things he couldn't explain, but never a full-bodied spirit. It was a stunning admission. The man who had been one of the pillars of paranormal television was, in effect, confessing that he had never personally seen the very thing the show was built around. Dave Tango, younger and eager, remained a fan favorite, but his career too was overshadowed by the association with TAPS. No matter how much sincerity he brought to investigations, he was tied to a brand that fans no longer trusted. The tragedy of the cast wasn't that they disappeared, it was that their reputations were forever linked to a controversy they couldn't shake. The pioneers of ghost television were left haunted, not by spirits, but by suspicion. One of the cruelest twists in the Ghost Hunters saga was how their own fans turned on them using the very skills the team had taught. In its early years, the show educated viewers in the art of skepticism. Jason and Grant showed audiences how to check pipes, wiring, drafts, and faulty equipment before blaming anything on ghosts. Fans were encouraged to investigate claims with logic, to separate fact from fear. That trust was the foundation of TAPS's appeal. But when the hood pull scandal aired, those same fans applied what they had learned to their heroes. The internet lit up with frame-by-frame analyses of the footage. Entire YouTube channels dissected the scene, highlighting how the hood pulled downward, how Grant's hand stayed buried in his pocket, how his body jerked unnaturally as though selling the illusion. Some even sketched diagrams showing how a retractable wire could have been sewn into his coat to create the effect. What had been presented as proof of the paranormal quickly unraveled under the same scrutiny TAPS had once used on hoaxers. The irony was painful. The very methods that had built the team's reputation now destroyed it. Fans who once cheered them on as truth seekers now accused them of being no better than the frauds they had exposed. Online communities, once devoted to discussing episodes and evidence, became hubs of criticism. Forum posts dissected not just the hood pull, but other suspicious moments from past season. Debunkers, who had once idolized TAPS, now led the charge against them. It wasn't just about one scandal anymore, it was about betrayal. The team that had stood for honesty had been caught in what looked like dishonesty, and the fallout was brutal. In the end, the students had surpassed the teachers. The audience TAPS had empowered with critical thinking used it to dismantle the very legacy of ghost hunters. Instead of being remembered as pioneers who elevated paranormal investigation, they became a cautionary tale. They weren't just haunted by their critics. They were haunted by their own fans who refused to let them escape accountability.